Welcome to the Node.js and Oracle Database Office Hours for December 2019. Thanks for joining. Standard safe harbor, especially in the open source world. We can't really predict when things are going to come up in the priority lists. I don't make purchasing decisions based on anything that we do. I have on this call myself in the middle, Christopher Jones, product manager in the scripting area for database access drivers. I do some of the small bits and pieces just to keep the team flying and you happy, and scheduling and just trying to make sure things get moving along quite nicely. Anthony does majority of the coding work now for all of our driver work, CX Oracle driver and node-oracledb driver with the rest of the development team. And Blaine Carter is the evangelist here in the open source space who goes out and does all the nice sort of conferencey things and gets to play with things like hardware and stuff like that. So for those who haven't joined an office hours before, pretty brief, we just have this sort of stuff that we kind of do as an icebreaker. This month we're going to talk about the node-oracledb 4.1 release, and then really we just throw it over to you for questions. So please think ahead of those questions, type them into the chat so we're ready to answer them. I don't have anything particularly fancy for demos, but the first thing which came out in the Oracle node-oracledb 4.1 release was support for Oracle Sharding. So Oracle database sharding is covered with this huge manual, Oracle Sharding, and it is a way of doing horizontal partitioning of data. It's all set up in the database. You effectively have one table, so you can access the same table name, but you connect through in this example, three different instances of the database, and you can decide how that data gets laid out across those partitions. You can partition it by numbers, like you might have an identifier number, strings, dates, raw values can be used, and in proper sharding, you can also partition on timestamps. Now that timestamp's not actually currently supported in this current release of node-oracledb 4.1. We'll get a new client library at some stage which will support that, but I don't think that's used very commonly. So in terms of sharding, you have multiple instances of Oracle database running, each with different shards, and the key thing is that you create connections to a particular shard. So you would connect your node-oracledb running off to one of these shards at a time. Or you can connect to a kind of catalog, which will let you access data from all of these at the same time if you need to do some kind of join. But typically the whole point of having shards is you don't want to access the rest of the data, you just want to access your particular data. So when you create a connection, you could connect to this database instance, and oops, that's the actual changelog. So you connect to the database instance and connect using a sharding key or a super sharding key. You get various layers of how you split that data. Sharding is based on Oracle's long-term partitioning strategy. So you can see this looks like when you create sharded tables, use that partition syntax. And then in this case, we have a primary key, which is the customer name. So this is how we're doing the sharding across on the customer name. And that means in the previous example, we had the three shards. Those three different databases would have different batches of names. And very simple, in node-oracledb, when you want to connect, at the connection time, you would specify a sharding key. Notice it's an array, and here that's because you can actually have multiple values in this. But here, we just specify one of the names for the sharding key, and the sharding magic in the back end knows which one of those, in this case, which one of these servers to connect to, and you connect direct to that. And then any query that you executes only on data in the particular shard that you can connect to. So there are various other things, sharding by number of multiple keys. Again, you can kind of see it just depends how this is all set up in the database. And one of the reasons I'm not doing any live demos is this does require multiple instances to be running, and can get kind of complex to set up. So just bear with me with this slideware at this stage. Dates are an interesting case. So if you do dates, the key thing, again, primary key is the sign-up date. So this is the sharding instances. Those three instances would be separated by dates. The key thing with dates is you need to be careful with the time zone that your node-oracledb is running in. You need to make sure either Linux, that the TZ environment variable, or the Aura SETZ environment variable, which is all documented here in the manual, is set correctly. And I would recommend going and testing that thoroughly before you run in production. Time zones are always tricky. Checking the manual for all of that good stuff. That was sharding. Anything that I should talk about there with Anthony with sharding? I mean, it's kind of you either connect to an instance or you connect to a generic catalog to get everything, and that's how it works. Done. Okay. The next thing that we added in 4.1 was just support for another couple of database end-to-end tracing attributes. So we have the client info and database op settings. You can see down here, or client info and database operation. These are traditional things. They've been available for some time. I'm not quite sure why we skipped those originally. We had the others, the three main ones before. These then get passed through to the database, piggybacked into the database when you do some kind of round trip to the database. This is obviously a query, so it has to go to the database from node-oracledb. And then DBAs, anybody doing auditing, looking at the $3 tables, will start seeing some of these identifiers, and you can do all sorts of analysis on those as well. A little small changes there. We're just doing some good little tweaks here at the end of the year. So those are really the two examples. The other interesting one is this query stream events buglet, which came up. So we had an issue reported on GitHub speaking about lots of memory being used with a query stream. And it turned out that it was, although it looked like it was growing, it was really just being held for the garbage collector to kick in, which was not kicking in for some time. The problem was that we had an example wrong and people were following our wrong example. So we have updated the query stream example. Actually, a couple of them were correct if you looked at some of the other examples, but the base example and the documentation were a little unclear on how to handle these events. So you can kind of see the diff we just sort of used to mention end event. Now we've added in these extra lines down here. So the fundamental thing is you don't want to close a connection until you've had the close event from a stream. If you close a connection, then you end up with all the data from that result set being held open until the garbage collector gets in. Whereas if you let close event come in, automatically result set will get closed, the memory will disappear, and then you can close the connection after that. That was a little sort of R problem kind of thing, not really a bug as so much as a best practice fix that you should be doing. And this is obviously not a code change in the driver itself. So if you've got an older version of node-oracledb running, you might want to go and look at how you're using these end events and make sure you're actually using the close event in the proper place. It could save you some memory on your application. Okay, what else do we have? We have, so OracleDB events is the setting to receive database notifications. So things like fast application notification events from the database into node-oracledb. And we had set that to be true all the time. And it turned out that there are some network configurations where that causes problems. You get a delay while there's a timeout. It could be like a 10-second delay trying to create a connection. Events tries to set up channels backwards and forwards so that notifications can occur from the database back to node-oracledb. And if the firewall's not open on the right ports and things like that, then they could see a hang. So we saw too many occurrences of that we reverted that back to the false state. But it does mean if you then want to use CQN, if you actually do want to get fan events, if you're doing high availability scenarios, you need to explicitly set it, which you're probably doing anyway because that would have been best practice. So those are really the sort of four main things. There are some other bug fixes in that release. You can look at the changelog if you like on GitHub, and we did some work in the error handling changes and things like that. And always thank you to our testing team, always doing great effort there, testing and incremental improvements and documentation as well. Good to see. So that's really it for 4.1, and I think we kind of wanted to just get a poll for what's needed in 4.2. There are obviously some enhancements there in the GitHub issues tracking list, things tagged as labeled as enhancements. We roughly had in our mind, well, and this is going back to that disclaimer about timelines, I really wanted to push for another release just before Christmas. I don't know that we can make that. It would obviously be a very small release if it was going to come out before Christmas. Just a couple of extra small tweaks and new features in there. I don't know whether that's even possible. It does depend a lot on exactly how complex things are when we start looking at them. Well, we talked about a couple of things internally, like nested fetches. So if you've got cursor expressions in your SQL queries, that would be kind of nice to support. Anthony had some thoughts about how that could be easily handled. However, looked like making it really neat and tidy would also affect the normal code paths, which is fine in a normal release, but when we've got a short release cycle, it means we don't get a lot of good testing. So I'm a little hesitant about that unless he's got some new magic. Couple of other small tweaks in terms of timeouts and some little changes which probably won't affect people might creep in. What else did we talk about, Anthony? I kind of forget now what. Data type. So nchar support possibly will come in for binding. You can always already query nchar, nvarchar, but we looked at binding. So we can support binding for nchar, nvarchar. I think we can do that one.
Client initiated.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So there's a new feature for continuous query notification with the latest versions of Oracle Database and Client, the 19.4 releases. Something called client initiated connections, which make it a lot easier to use. The existing existing continuous query notification mechanism required the database be able to access back and connect back to the node application, which meant it needed an IP address and able to navigate through firewalls and things differently to the normal connection, which goes obviously from node to the database. Client initiated connections, as they sound, are just initiated by node-oracledb. So the same sort of network setup that you need for your normal connections would work fine. So yeah, that kind of thing we hope to do just for a 4.2 release. And the other reason, the real reason for getting a release out soon is that there's a couple of changes have gone into node.js itself, version 13, where they seem to be returning memory a little differently, and we want to put in a little patch to make that a little stabler. Seem to be something changed in 13.2, and I don't know whether they're going to revert it in a future release or not. So it wasn't in there in 13.1, which we did the bulk of our testing with. So if we want to get a fix out soon, then maybe 4.2 is a good release for that. So that's just our kind of current thoughts. But nobody's actually reported any issues with 13 yet, so maybe the pressure's off and we can do a delayed release and get some solid features in there. But that's it. Anybody got any questions? No questions? Always a good thing. Means everybody's happy, right? Last call. Any questions? Otherwise, we will just wrap it up, get the video up later in the next day or so, and get on to doing some solid work on the drivers. Let me put these resources up. I'm sure, having found the office hours, you've found these resources already. Take a screenshot. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending the node-oracledb, Node.js, and Oracle Database office hours for December this year. Everyone have a great festive season, and we'll talk again in February 2020. Goodbye.